Well, first and foremost, very good organisation so that students feel secure in the learning environment that you've created. So basically setting up systems whereby students understand that you respect them, that you have organised things properly, that the assessments that you'll use will be fair and reasonable.
Those students who spent more hours sitting in front of a computer going over the same exercises again and again ultimately didn't do as well as those who were much more selective. If they haven't fundamentally grasped the basis of the subject, then they just get more confused.
And I think that's what's really important, is that we need to mentor our students very closely. Be there to ask them the questions, but what about this and what about that? We saw this, is that really interesting? Well, might be, and just brainstorming, being able to brainstorm and being accessible for brainstorming, and the students really respond to that.
Well, I think one of the things I've learnt is never rely on the old ways too much. So I'm constantly challenging myself to think about better ways of teaching students.
Communicating in an interesting way. Sometimes it's just little anecdotes, but you'll find tricks and interesting things, an interesting way to convey an issue that will help students remember. And funny enough, that's what I get back on the exam. It will be a question that's quite hard, and they'll say, but for example, and they'll get my example, the one thing that's not in the textbook, so they would have had to have been at my lecture on the day to have gotten that anecdote, is the example they give me back in the exam.
Being able to engage students more and trying to, certainly in the tertiary level, work out innovative ways of breaking down the sort of lecturer up the front, giving the Sermon of the Mount and saying, this is the way it is.
The student having the choice of what it is they want to do and some idea of where they want to be at the end of it, and being able to inspire those students to do as well as they can.
And I've tended to notice here a difference to the way that we did things, say, at Oxford. In Oxford, the first year lectures were given by our best and biggest names. Here it seems to be first year is more service teaching. It's a little bit like transition between high school and university. It's a different model. And that seems to me the point where we could have greatest impact, by having really high quality inspirational teachers teaching in the first year.
Sometimes didactic lecturing can be absolutely a big turn-off. I think it depends on the individual how good a communicator they are. If you're a good lecturer, you can convey things, and even a didactic lecture can be brilliant. But if it's just rote, it's just diabolical.
I think that's why I'm interested in more of this sort of spontaneous interaction, because in the traditional way that we treat material, teaching material, it's just a series of lectures and you don't necessarily get much response. And I sometimes call it like lecturing to porridge, because up there nothing very much happens, It's very hard to get a reaction out of anybody down there.
I do think you need to know about 8 times as much as what you're teaching to teach well. So you might have this core bit that you need to teach, but unless you have this massive context around it, then you're not going to teach it well.
Well, they could do lectures online. My son does lectures online when he doesn't want to come into his 8 o'clock lecture. I don't blame him. He's smart enough that he doesn't need to talk up to the lecturer afterwards or have some sort of rapport with the lecturer. He can get the lecture, he can read the book, and he can pass the exam and do just fine. That doesn't work for all students.
And one of the interesting feedbacks from students, say from Germany or from some of the American universities, is how much they've appreciated having practical and lecture courses running in parallel. And I think that is important.
What I have been trying to do is give them these counters so that they can respond to a series of questions that I put up on the screen. And because it's linked through digitally, you can then immediately get their response. So you can get a sense of their understanding and try and pick apart that understanding.